So I figured out quite a long time ago that there are really only three states of being, or that you can divide your being into these three potential states. You can negotiate, you can tyrannize, or you can be enslaved. Those are your three options, and that's an exhaustive list. Because you might ask yourself, well, why do I have to negotiate? And the answer is, well, you can either negotiate or you could be a tyrant, which means you impose your will with force on others, or you can be a slave, which means you receive passively the imposition of force by others. Let's go into that with some detail. Why not be a tyrant? If it means you can get your way. Well, first of all, it's not self-evident that the way you would get if you gave in to the impulses that you have to use power and force to dominate would actually be in your best interest. So you might say, well, I want to get my way, but what that really means is that you have a very shallow conceptualization of what you are attempting to serve. If you were attempting to serve a sophisticated concept of you wouldn't use force. And the reason you wouldn't use force is because, well, it's not like other people are just gonna lay there and take it. Even if you can intimidate them, you can use fear and aggression to force them to do your bidding. You're never going to get their best from them. At minimum, they will rebel by holding back. It's much more likely that they'll go farther than that and sabotage, even if they don't have the courage to confront you directly. And eventually, you'll have an off day, and there will be enough of the people that you've tyrannized so that they will tear you into bits. So why can't I just get my way? And if I can enforce that on others, why shouldn't I? It's because it's a really bad strategy, unless all you're trying to do is cause mayhem and misery for yourself as much as other people. And then, well, why shouldn't I be a slave? Well, you might say, I don't want the responsibility that comes along with my own decision-making. But if you agree to serve the role of slave, you're just tyrannizing yourself. You're not giving yourself any protection. You're not providing any space for yourself to exist. And you'll become resentful and bitter. And from resentment and bitterness springs a kind of destructive and corrosive anger. And out of that hellish brew, you'll become contemptuous of yourself. You'll begin to brew up all sorts of vengeful fantasies. You can turn yourself into an unbelievably dangerous person by brooding on your vengeful fantasies for years. And then you can find yourself going to places that, if you were in your right mind, you would have never wanted to wander even near. Because you ever ask yourself, how do people get to the point where they do something terrible, like shoot up a high school? And the answer is, well, they spend about 3 years fantasizing about it. And so you can get to some pretty hellish places if you spend 3 years doing nothing but that. And if you want to be motivated in that direction, take a real deep trip into hell, then the resentment and bitterness that builds up inside you as a consequence of cowardly acceding to involuntary slavery is a good way to get there. So I wouldn't recommend the whole slavery and tyranny routes. They're not productive, to say the least. So then negotiation. What does negotiation mean? That's the first thing we'll have to discuss. What does it mean to have negotiated something successfully? Well, if you negotiate a mountain climb successfully, you get to the top of the mountain. And if you negotiate a river, you cross the river. So to negotiate difficult terrain is to maintain your trajectory towards a goal, despite the obstacles that you encounter on the way, and as a consequence of using what the territory affords you along the way. And it's a dance with the territory that nonetheless allows you to proceed towards your desired destination. You know, when I had clients come to me who were unhappy in their job, we'd always go through these things like, well, I'm miserable in my current job. And so I'd evaluate that. Is that just because you're a miserable person? Like, are you miserable about everything? I wasn't finding that out in a judgmental sense. It's part of doing a differential diagnosis with depression and anxiety. But let's say it was job specific. Then I'd say, well, maybe you're useless. Like, I wasn't that blunt, you know, but to cut to the chase for the purpose of the argument, it's like, well, maybe you're a terrible employee. And so we'd go through that, and often we'd find, you know, there were some ways they weren't the world's most stellar employee and could work on fixing that. But there were situations where, no, I see, you're just being tortured by a psychopath. Well, it's no wonder you're miserable, you know? Well, what do I do? So you want to be with this same psychopath 10 years from now? There's a lot less of you and a lot more of him by then in the relative dynamics of your relationship. Let's walk through that and think it through, you know, till you're scared enough about not changing so that you desperately want to change. So, fine, you're timid and you're afraid to negotiate. It's like you ramp up your fear about the bitterness and resentment you will sink into if you're the slave. See if that bolsters your courage a bit, and it generally does with people. Now, you do that in concordance with developing that more positive vision that we already discussed. So people often say, well, I'm afraid to negotiate. I'm afraid to say what I want. It's like, hey, fair enough, man. People are afraid to say what they want. First of all, they're embarrassed or they're disgusted or they're ashamed. All those things, those pop up right away. And then they're also afraid at a deeper level because it's hard for people to hurt you really effectively unless they know exactly what you want. Because if they know exactly what you want and they withhold it, then that's a very effective weapon. So when you reveal to someone what you want, then you give them a weapon. Now, if you don't, you're never going to get what you want. But if you do, they can definitely wield it as a cudgel. So there's a fair bit of trust involved. And that's even true in relationship to yourself, you know, because if you keep yourself fuzzy-minded about who you are, then you can pretend that when you fail, it didn't happen. But if you're sharp in what you need and want and you specify that, and then you fail to deliver, despite the fact that you had a good faith negotiation with yourself, then you've betrayed yourself, and that's stark and evident. So here's another aim of a good negotiation. If you optimize the negotiation, you'll be able to undertake the consequent activities in a state of play. Play emerges when negotiation has been optimized. Now, this is a good thing to know in a marriage, too. Sexual activity within the context of a marriage is a high and sophisticated form of play. It's perhaps the highest and most sophisticated form of play, if optimized. Because play is rather fragile, because it's an indication of the emergence of a kind of perfect equilibrium, perfect dynamism. It's hard to attain. If you negotiate successfully, then that can emerge. That's actually a hallmark of successful negotiation. Let's play this through in the context of sexual negotiation between the two partners of a new couple. Say they're 26, you've got 2 kids, they attracted to each other, thank God, because that's a very difficult thing to overcome if it's not there, but they're alienated. And that's very common for people of that age, especially if they have 2 kids and they both have careers, let's say, because first of all, they've got 65 to 70 hours of work a week at minimum, just working and taking care of the kids. They don't have much time left over for romance, for example, or it's difficult to find the time. It's like, yeah, it is. It's difficult to not find the time too, man. So that's worth thinking about. If you were being a couples therapist, this is what you might do. Say to the wife, well, if your sex life was set up the way you would want it to be, what would that look like? Let's parameterize it. How many times a week would you have sex? People get antsy about discussing such things, and they'll go, well, I don't really know how to answer that question. Or I don't know how to decide that. Or, well, you know, it depends on the week. It's like, That's all that vague hiding things in the fog crap. It's like, no, you don't know, eh? You say, I don't know. You know what that means? It means quit bothering me with your questions. It means go away and leave me alone. It's avoidance behavior. I don't know. You know, or you don't want to know and you're hiding. So I used to corner my clients when they would do that sort of thing. We'll address the first part. You don't know how often. Okay, 300 times a year. No, that seems like too much. It's like, okay, good. We got an upper bound established. Once every 8 months. It's like, no, that seems a little low. It's like, okay, good. Now we've got it parameterized to somewhere between twice a year and once a day. Are you willing to admit that? Yes. Okay, so let's bring in the parameters here. Once every 3 months. Well, you remember, you're just talking to one person here. No, that seems like a little too infrequent. Once every 2 days. No, that seems a little too frequent. Okay, well, we're getting a lot closer to something that's getting calibrated. You want each partner to come to their decision about how often on their own. Because there is individual variability in this sort of thing. Like, men tend to desire sex more frequently than women, for example. Remember now, you're married to each other, so you want this to be sustainable. You're going to be with this person, if you're lucky, for 50 years. And maybe you're trying to plot out something that will last 50 years. So that's what sustainable means. It means you're going to stick to this come hell or high water for 5 decades. And you might say, well, it's going to decline over time. It's like, that's so obvious, Young people are often more sexually inclined than older people, but especially if they have little kids, they don't have that much time. So it isn't obvious that it has to decline with time. And you could also decide that one of the things you want to negotiate is how it won't decline over time. Then it wouldn't have to. You don't have to think about it as inevitable. And you might also notice that you might hope, and there's what you want again, that you could have a deeply satisfying, intimate life for the whole span of your marriage. There is something to work for. That's going to take some work, right? Because you're going to have to stay attractive to each other. How much time do you want to spend together? Well, a 16-hour date's a long date. Now, maybe once every 3 months, you want to go out for a weekend. These are the sorts of things you start to negotiate, right? With your vision of your paradisal romantic life together. Maybe every 3 months you have a bed and breakfast and you have a romantic getaway and, it's the whole damn weekend, but you're not going to have that every week. That's a special occasion thing. And it's the same with the week-long holiday and all of that. Don't be expecting to get too many of those. You want to set up the situation so that it's special, but relatively obstacle-free. You might think, well, how much time do you need to spend with someone to have a good date? And it's like, well, what do you need to do with someone to have a good time if you're just concentrating on each other? It's like, well, you might want to have dinner together. The classic movie romance date is dinner and a show. And that's what, 3 hours, 4 hours, something like that. So it's something like that. It's not 10 minutes, and it's not 6 hours. It's something like an hour and a half to 3 hours. And you might have to start with an hour and a half. It's a little rushed, but it's not nothing. And then maybe you can expand that outward. So, your first negotiated date could be something like an hour and a half to 3 hours. And it's once a week. So try that for a month or 2 months and see how that goes. And maybe you can expand. Your goal might be to expand that upward to 3 dates a week or more than that if you both can manage it, and slightly less than that if you can't. But my experience has been working with people that they need to have 90 minutes of intimate time with each other at least once a week. They also have to have a 90-minute practical conversation about their lives together about once a week. If they fell below that, they start to get alienated from one another psychologically and physically. And so that might bring us to the first element necessary to discuss when defining what negotiation and successful negotiation means. If If you negotiate something successfully, you get to where you wanted to go. So here's the first rule. To negotiate properly, you have to know what you want. So then you might ask, well, how do I know what I want? It's complicated. If you don't want to think it through, you can do it in a more simple and unsophisticated way. You can think, well, I'll negotiate for everything I can get. Well, that's a pretty boneheaded approach, by the way. Or if I can just get a little bit more than I'm offered, that'll be sufficient. You know, that's better than no strategy at all, but it's still pretty damn sad. But look, when I was a kid, I applied for lots of restaurant jobs. I got every job I ever applied for, by the way. I could go into a job interview and I could tell the people who were interviewing me, restaurant owners, who are very skeptical, by the way, because there's huge turnover in restaurant staff and most people quit after a couple of weeks and they're no good while they're there. In fact, they're not only no good, they're economically counterproductive. 60% of managers, by the way, add negative economic net value to their companies. And it's higher among, high turnover staff. So the idea that the employer exploits the worker is pretty damn funny when you realize that most workers cost far more than they produce. It's not obvious at all who's exploiting who, Marxists. In any case, you're a young person and you go to a restaurant interview, you have to have your aims together. You want to want the job. That has to not be a lie. You can't act like you want the job. If you don't want the damn job, don't take it. If you think I should want a job, then go home and sort yourself out conceptually till you actually want it. Don't go to the damn interview ambiguous. Why would anyone in their right mind want to hire you if you don't even know if you want to work there? And don't lie about it, because then you start off your new job with a lie. That's not a wise move. Write down 10 reasons why you want the job. And if you can't, well, think harder. Or if you can't, then don't take the job or look for a different job. And then you can go there and say, look, here's what I know. I've washed dishes before. I know how to use the machines. By the way, if you work 10% longer, you'll make 40% more money. In most jobs, you should be there early enough so that it's kind of noticeably early, and you should leave late enough so it's sort of noticeably generous. Why? Well, do you want a promotion or not? If the answer is no, well, then you should think again. If the answer is yes, well, then why don't you distinguish yourself a little bit with an excess of commitment? I used to put my son on the steps when he misbehaved when he was a little kid. And once he got old enough to develop some verbal understanding, we had a staircase sitting rule. So he'd sit there when he was being antisocial or impulsive. And the rule was, well, I'd ask him a question. Do you want to have a good day? Or do you want to have a bad day? Now, bad day means you have a temper tantrum and you're all upset and everybody is upset around you and no one's having any fun, and that goes on a long time. That's a bad day. A good day is you have a little blip in your misbehavior and you rectify it and everything goes about its proper route and we continue doing what we're going to do. And you get along with everyone. Those are the options in front of you. Which you're going to sit here until you decide which of those you want. Do you want a good day or a bad day? I want a good day. It's like, are you ready to start again? No, not yet. Okay, you sit there until you get your act together and you're willing to focus on having a good day. So you can ask yourself when you're preparing to negotiate, you want to have a good day or a bad day? And then maybe it's not just a day because you're negotiating with your wife. Do you want to have a good marriage or a bad marriage? So what are we aiming at here? We're aiming at the good at work, the good in your marriage, the good in your bedroom, the good with your children, the good with your family, the good with your community, with your time outside of work, with your care of yourself, with your desire to be alive, with the regulation of your emotion, the relationship you have with beauty. And so you have to have some sense of what you want. You know, if you're unhappy with your wife, you come home and she doesn't greet you at the door in a very friendly manner, maybe. Now you're pissed off. Okay, so why are you upset? Well, maybe you're hungry. Maybe you got, your work day didn't go very well. Maybe you hate your job. Maybe you hate your boss. Maybe you hate your life. Maybe you hate your wife. God only knows why you're angry. You know, if it's got to the point where you hate your wife and your life, well, it's going to be a rough negotiation. You try to narrow it down to something manageable and you think, well, I don't really like the way that I'm treated when I come home from work. I'm taken for granted. Lots of people will say that, man. I'm taken for granted. But you have to decompose that. Well, when I come home from work, it doesn't seem to really matter to anyone. Well, you know, that can be pretty annoying if you're working hard and you're making sacrifices for your family. It's not absolutely unreasonable to expect, at minimum, a bit of respect, but maybe also a bit of appreciation. And that's not just selfish, you know, because achievable in this world. A good negotiation doesn't mean a compromise. A good negotiation means that both parties walk away satisfied. A great negotiation means both parties walk away thrilled. So you both walk away and neither of you have any doubts whatsoever that you made the right decision. In fact, you're enthusiastic about getting at the job and you're inspired. Then you've negotiated properly. Imagine that you do 100 things in your life, and so you'll undergo 100 intense negotiations, and it'll be a hell of a lot more than that if you include micro negotiations. And imagine that every single negotiation you aimed at being thrilled at the outcome, well, then all the things you do in your life you'll be thrilled with. That's a good deal. So there's the aim of a negotiation. You want to be so thrilled with outcome you can't even believe it happened. That's the upper end for the negotiation. You can do that. My wife and I have had dates together 2 or 3 times a week for years. It's been something we practiced for 30 years. And it got us through some damn rough times. And I've noticed, especially came to mind more in the last couple of years, probably because we've negotiated a lot of things and so don't have to anymore. Because that's another hallmark, by the way, of a successful negotiation. If it's a successful negotiation, you don't have to have the negotiation anymore. You just both do what you said you were going to do, and it works, and the problem is done. So that's another answer to the early question, right? Why do I have to negotiate? It's like, so that you don't have to argue about everything, every second of the rest of your miserable, hellish life. That's why. And so that peace that can be established through negotiation can take the place of that abysmal, eternal misery. And that might sound dramatic, but you wouldn't think that was dramatic if you sat in divorce court with a couple of couples. You negotiate because it's the alternative to hell. And so I negotiated dates with my wife for a very long time. And I noticed recently, it was quite funny, that she always had something on her mind that was bothering her that she would bring up just before the date. I was wondering about that. It's like, well, is that because she doesn't want to have the date? Like, what's going on here? And what we both realized, because I said, well, it looks to me like this is a pattern. What's going on? And she said, oh, I think because if there's something on my mind, I can't pay full attention to what's happening right now. It's like, hey, fair enough. Could be, you know, if you're on a date with someone and you really want it to go well, it's every romantic movie, you really want to be with the person you're with, and then you really want them to be paying attention to what's happening right now. Well, people can't pay attention if something else is on their mind. And so what she was trying to do was just clear out any potential remaining disharmony that might have existed. We had one quite comical discussion. We got prepared for our date, and she came upstairs and she told me I hadn't been cleaning the sink very well. Took her question seriously, and I thought, okay. Well, I rinsed the damn sink out. I thought it was clean, and she said, well, no, I often have to clean. I said, well, you know, you bought this new grate for the bottom of the sink, and I find it annoying. I don't know what function it serves, and it makes it difficult to clean the sink. And because I am annoyed by it, and I don't know what function it serves, and it makes the sink more difficult to clean, maybe I don't clean the sink as well as I might. And she said, well, I'll get rid of the grate. It's like, okay, I'll tell you what, why don't you just put the grate aside for a week and see if you can live without it and see if the sink's cleaner. And she said, okay, well, that's a good deal. There you go, the hallmark of a good negotiation. That's a good deal. What does that mean? It doesn't mean, oh, fine, have it your way. You know, that's not a sign of a good deal. And it doesn't mean, yes, dear, you know, I'll do exactly what you say, which is also not the sign of a negotiation. What it means is, I could live with that happily, and I can't think of a better solution. And so that's sort of getting what you want, isn't it? I could live with it happily, and I can't think of anything better. I used to have a weekly meeting with my kids and my wife. We would negotiate the upcoming roster of household duties. Now, everybody sort of had their household duties. How do you decide that? Your house has rooms, right? And the yard. Pick all the little geographical locales of your house. Decide amongst you what needs to be done. You want to hit a minimum standard of hygiene, and then maybe you want the room to be in the kind of shape that everyone thinks it should be in, so they're happy to be there. Then, who should do what? Well, it should be divided as equally as it can be, given everybody's abilities. Because otherwise, there's no reciprocity in the dynamic, and people are being enslaved or tyrannized, and that's not a recipe for a happy household. And then, well, the kids should learn to take on more and more responsibility as they mature, and they should be willing to pitch in to indicate their gratitude for being provided happily with the necessities of life, because things could be a lot worse than that. And the reason they should do that is, well, that's how a civilized person would behave. And you might say, well, why does civilized matter? And the answer is, well, do you want people to want to be around you or not? Because that's the question. And if you say, well, I don't care what people think of me, then you're an idiot and a liar. Your response should be, yeah, I would like it if when I go to college and I have some roommates, they don't think I'm absolutely psychotically out of my mind and neurotic beyond comprehension in the first 2 months we live together, and then conspire behind my back to make me as miserable as I possibly can be, so that I will leave as rapidly as I can, so they don't have to put up with me for one more second. And if you don't think that happens in the first year of college, just kids, you're blind. That's why your kids should do their household jobs. That's one of many reasons. I'll add another rule just to decorate it. Don't agree to something you don't agree to, right? Imagine this is a pretty permanent binding contract you're signing here. If it's not okay, don't pretend it's okay. During the negotiation, it's also a time to be a stickler, not because you're being a pain in the neck, but because you're being honest. You have to say, look, I can't agree to that because I know that I won't be motivated to deliver on my promise if that's the premise of our agreement. We have to find a different way because I can't assent wholeheartedly to that. So you develop your vision and you share your vision and you integrate it, and then you implement it sort of badly to begin with and negotiate a little bit more around the edges, and away you go. And so that's part of the practicalities of negotiation.